How you doing? My name is Matt. I'm a recovered alcoholic. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, everyone who put this together. Thank you to Dale, who got in touch with me, and to Carl and Steve and Jordan, guys, for giving me some rides. Thank you to everyone here. Everyone is incredibly nice. Whenever I'm in this part of the country, everyone is really nice. In fact, I wish it would stop. Because you guys who are natives, I don't know if you understand what we're like in New England. We're like cranky and sarcastic and angry, you know what I mean? And you make me feel like a really bad person. I went to the hotel today. I was looking for a place to eat, and I came down to the front desk, and the girl beamed, and she was like, "How are you doing? Are we taking care of you?" I said, "What does that mean?" And I asked her for a place to eat, and I said, and she started pulling out a map, and I said, I have a little problem. I'm embarrassed to admit this here. I said, I'm a vegetarian. And she went, "Oh." Which I thought, you guys have good steak out here. When I was a kid, we used to order Omaha steak. But you grow a lot of vegetables, so I would think that being a vegetarian would get me a little, thank you for supporting our economy. And I went down to the grocery store to find non-meat meat. And I was looking around. You guys know what it's like when you go to a different grocery store? It's the little things in life, right? You're baffled. And a guy came out, he said, "You finding what you're looking for?" And again, I was afraid to tell him I was vegetarian. And I said, "I'm looking for hot dogs that aren't real hot dogs." And apparently I'm the first guy to ever go into this place looking for non-meat hot dogs. And so they assembled a task force of 5 people. Really. He went in the back, got another guy. 5 people walked around with me to a section none of them had ever been to. It's like the Ark of the Covenant of this grocery store where there's non-chicken, non-hot dogs. And it's a very Zen thing. It's not a hot dog, and yet it is. And they were so happy they could help me. And I left, and I'm like, I am such a bad person, because if one of you were in Boston and you were like, "I need a hospital," I'd be like, "You know what? You need to grow up and solve your own problems." And it's really intimidating. I got a call last summer, I believe it was, from Dale. I didn't know Dale. I was out on the lake. I'm a city guy. And I came back to the States, and I moved to the hills. I moved to the mountains. And so when these guys picked me up, they're like, "Oh, you're not used to this." I'm like, "Well, this is Manhattan compared to where I'm living to right now, you know." And so I'm a city guy living in the middle of the mountains and the woods. There's not much there. The maple trees. The mayor of the town I live in is a cow, I think. And last time we elected a rake, you know. And when I moved there, I needed to find some things to do so that you ever seen The Shining with Jack Nicholson? I was trying to prevent that. So I go outside and I try, we have nice mountains and lakes and stuff. And so I foolishly bought a little boat, which was a giant mistake. And I was on that. And I get a call from this number. Anyone who's ever owned a boat knows exactly what I mean, right? Sounds good. It's like communism on paper. It looks real nice. I see this number shows up as Nebraska. And I don't know anyone in Nebraska. And when I see, some of you probably relate to this, when I see an unknown number, I have this kind of reaction. It's really paradoxical and confusing, because simultaneously I'm excited, but I also feel dread. Do you know what I mean? I'm almost 10 years well, but my past still catches up with me. So I still get calls like from a visa I had in 1994. Like, "You owe us money." I was like, "I was drinking then." They're like, "We don't care. I'm so drunk. Write it off, please." They won't. So I saw this number from Nebraska, and I did that thing where, you want to let it go to voicemail, your safeguard. You're like that, and then I can reserve the right to call back or not. But then the alcoholic part of you is like, "I need to know. Do it. And I answered, and I ended up talking to Dale for a while, a guy I'd never heard of, and he told me this. He said, "We've been looking for you for a long time. And now I'm wishing I let it go to voicemail." Because I don't remember being in Nebraska. Apparently I was, and I did something there, and this is bad. He's been looking for me. And I was like, oh, did I say this is Matt? No, he's not here. This is Pat, his brother. And I started talking to Dale, and Dale says, we've been looking for you for a long time. We heard you speak. It's a recording that was on the internet. And, he said, man, he told me a story. He said, I download tapes while I work, which is something I did a lot. I used to travel a lot when I was overseas, and there were times when I wasn't around people, and so, that would be my connection with other alcoholics, is I'd get a speaker tape. And he said, man, I just listened to you talk, and he paid me some really nice compliments, let's put it that way. And he said, I'm so thrilled to get in touch with you, and we'd love to have you come out here. And we finished this good conversation, and I hung up the phone. He said, I'm sorry, I feel like there's a little bit of hero worship. And I hung up the phone with him, and I felt like such a fraud and such a phony. I was like, if this guy only knew who I was, he would not say those things. But, yeah, and here's the truth. I am a fraud and I am a phony. That's the truth. There's a thing that I call God that works through me, and it cleans that stuff out. And whatever is left, and sometimes that's very little, that's authentic. But it's important for us to establish that right off the bat, to kind of tie into what Mickey said. If we're going to have a real conversation, if we're really going to talk, instead of me talking to you, we have to establish that right off the bat, who and what I am. And then we can have a real conversation, as opposed to me coming up here telling you how it is and what you should do. We can really talk. Don't get me wrong, you're still not going to be able to really say anything. But I just wanted to establish that. I received recovery as an undeserved gift. I need to make that very clear. I didn't deserve what I got. Still to this day, I get things that I absolutely do not deserve. You can call that grace. I was always uncomfortable with that word, but it probably is. There are these things that happen in my life. I don't deserve them. And what I got, I absolutely didn't deserve. And don't get me wrong, as we're going to talk about, I'll talk about a little bit of my story. We'll certainly talk about it in these workshops. That'll be kind of the point of the workshops, as we already saw with Mickey. You got to do some legwork. But ultimately, the legwork, as hard as it feels, as terrifying as it is to do the legwork of the steps, as monumental as it seems at the time, like climbing Everest, the truth is this: the work that I did to get what I got the good end of that deal. It's like if Carl called me and said, Matt, congratulations, you won some contest, you won a free car. That's pretty good. And I'm excited, and that's the prize. The work that we do in the steps would be like this. It's like Carl said, yeah, but there's a catch. And I say, what is it? And Carl says, that's a real bummer. What is it? Unfortunately, you're going to have to get yourself down to the dealership to pick up the car. Still a pretty good deal. And I said, all right, Carl, that sounds good. And Carl goes, and this week they're only open till 6 p.m. All right, still a pretty good deal. And what else? It's supposed to rain a bit this week. Just drizzly, but there'd be some rain. Still a pretty good deal. So what I did, the level of energy that I had to exert, and the things I still have to do to keep God in my life and stay well, I still get the good end of that bargain. It's still a gift. And it's incommensurate to the amount of energy I have to exert to get it. I need to be really clear about that. I grew up in a family full of alcoholism and drug addiction. I was born an alcoholic. I was born a drug addict. And when I say that, I don't mean necessarily that I have a genetic predisposition. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. I don't know. It doesn't matter too much to me. What I mean when I say I was born an alcoholic and a drug addict, I mean I was born right off the bat, I was not okay. I was not okay. I didn't know I wasn't okay because that's all that I knew. The truth is, probably realistically, the day that I figured out I wasn't okay is the first time I got drunk. And when I found the medicine of alcohol as a kid in high school, the first time I got relief was the first time it hit me like, oh, I've been in a lot of pain for a long time. I've been real uncomfortable for a long time. I just got so used to it because it was all that I knew that I had no context in which to place it. Does that make sense? The best way I have to describe it is like, anyone ever skate, ice skate, or play hockey when you're kids? Especially if you're playing hockey, you crank your skates really tight. And they hurt, right? My dad used to use a skate key. It would cut off circulation, remember? The pain, it was unbelievable. I'd tell my dad. My dad was a Marine, so he was pretty stoic, right? Like, Dad, my feet are bleeding. He's like, get on the ice, damn it. And when you're out on the ice, your skates hurt, your feet pinch, but eventually your adrenaline is pumping and your focus is on other things, so the pain it fades to the background, right? And you get used to it. It still hurts, but you just take the pain for granted because it's always there. It's like your baseline existence. And here's one of the most beautiful feelings in a human life. If you've never had this, I suggest you do it just to get this. Go skate with really tight ice skates on for about an hour or two, then come back to the bench, take your skates off, and put on sneakers. It's amazing, isn't it? You're floating on angel wings. And it's just this mundane run-of-the-mill thing where you're just taking off ice skates, but the relief is so beautiful. You forgot that there was a thing called relief. You just took it for granted that you're always in this pain and in this discomfort. And when I first started to figure out that I wasn't okay is when I started drinking. And I never planned on drinking. I never planned on drugging. I've spent a good chunk of my youth paying for other people's alcoholism and addiction. They didn't ask me if I wanted to pay. I paid. And it's hard to explain. It's hard to explain what I mean unless you grew up like I did. And when I say I grew up, because I've been going to meetings, guys, since I was probably 7 years old, 6 or 7. The meeting was my babysitter. I used to bring my math workbook to the basement of Norwood Hospital while my dad did his meeting. And my mom would put us in Alateen meetings. That's a room of 15 and crazy dysfunctional kids. Let's put them together. That's good. That's like what happens in jail. Like, oh, let's get guys who give each other more bad ideas. It's a symposium of bad ideas, right? And when I say I paid for other people's alcoholism, people assume, oh, that your dad crashed the car through the front of the house and you had to, it's the things you'd never think of, you know. My dad died from this when I was 12. My brother was 9. My dad was a wonderful guy, probably the smartest guy I ever met. When my dad was doing well, my dad was, let me just give you an example. On Facebook, someone put up a picture of my dad the other day. And a kid that grew up across the street from me in a neighborhood called West Roxbury in Boston, my buddy Brian, he put a little comment under there that said, best dad in the neighborhood. My dad grew up really poor. My dad grew up 6 boys. He was the son of a Boston cop. He grew up really hard. He grew up in the kind of household where if you come home 5 minutes late, you get punched. And that's how it was. And back in those days, there's nothing you could do about it. And if you called the police would show up to beat you for calling the cops on your old man. You know what I mean? Plus, his old man was a lieutenant. And my dad grew up so hard that when my dad got out of high school, this was 1969, my dad decided, like, that was rough. I need to go mellow out. And so my dad mellowed out by joining the Marine Corps. That was mellow. Paris Island was like Club Med to this guy compared to the way he grew up. And when my dad was doing well, my dad was the best guy you'd ever meet. He coached the sport teams. And my dad, when he left the Marine Corps, put himself through night school, became a very successful guy, became a wealthy guy. My dad would take all the guys in the neighborhood to Red Sox games and to Bruins games. And, that was my dad. And when my dad wasn't doing well, he disappeared, and you didn't know if he was alive or dead. And so when I say you pay for other people's alcoholism, people assume I mean you would come home loaded and kick the dog and knock down the Christmas tree. No, we just didn't see him for 4 or 5 days because he was a proud Marine and he was too ashamed to come home after a relapse, and I didn't know where he was, and that was pretty awful, you know. He died hitting about a year sober. He had been in the bathroom for about 3 days. We came home from vacation to find him there, and again, people assume, oh, you paid for other people's alcoholism. That's what you mean. You lost the house, which we did, and you lost, yeah, it's the things you wouldn't think of. When I was 13, I will never forget getting called into the kitchen. My brother was 10. My mother called us both in there. She had that voice when she was serious. She said, both of you, get in here. Do you guys know what yiz is? Y-I-Z? That is the Boston equivalent of y'all. We have a plural for multiple, we have that. We use yiz. Like my mother would say, listen, you better have the garbage out in the morning. Let me just tell you, it better be out or else. And we'd always mess with my mother. What if we don't do it, Mom? Yeah, go ahead and find out. Why? What will happen? Yeah, you'll see. We tortured the poor woman. She raised us on her own. I was 13, my brother was 10. My mom called us in the kitchen. I remember walking in there, and I didn't know what we did. My mom's like a CIA interrogator. You don't want to give her anything. You just want to stay silent, because even if she asks, how are you? Fine. Oh, really? She'll work with that. She'll get something. It's amazing, but it's like one of those, those shows with the forensic evidence, like, how do you get that? And, we both walked in there, and my mom had this weird look on her face, like we weren't in trouble. And then she pulled out this bag. It was a bookstore from a little bookshop. And she pulled out this bag. And I looked at my brother. I'm like, what is this? And she takes this out, and she holds this book up. And my mother goes, this is a vagina. And I was 13 years old. Men in the room, do you remember how much testosterone is coursing through your veins at the age of 13? Do you remember that? It's terrible. I'm now forever ruined because I've got the image of my mom with that book tattooed into my psyche the rest of my life. 13, you're ruined. You'll never forget that. There's all Freudian pathology. My brother ran for his life. He screamed. He went, you're a pervert! And I froze like I was looking at Medusa. Like I couldn't move, I wanted to escape, and my mom was just sitting there, and I went, and moms in the room, especially if you're a single mom, you can probably figure out what my mother's doing. My mother's a saintly woman, and my mother had to raise 2 boys who are animals on her own, and unfortunately the other guys in my family, they were dying of overdoses, alcoholism, or going to prison. And so my mom, being a saintly woman, is trying to be both mom and dad, something that I didn't appreciate until I was, I got sober at 28. And my mother said, I have to give my boys the sex talk. And I'm sure it was just as uncomfortable for her as it was for us. But being a good mother and a good woman, she said, either I do it or they're going to learn it from some kid on a schoolyard, and I'm not going to let that happen. And so when I say I paid for other people's alcoholism, it's the things that you don't understand unless you grew up like I did. It's these little things where you go, like, this is uncomfortable. This is the result of someone else drinking. And as I'm a kid going to Alateen meetings and seeing counselors, what I'm being told about drug addiction and alcoholism, as you were all told, is it's a disease. An idea that I was desperately invested in believing as a child. And you can probably figure out why. If it's a disease, Dad can't help it. If it's not a disease, it just means that Dad loves vodka and Coke more than us. And so as a kid, I'm really invested in believing this is a disease. Unfortunately, what happened is I saw a couple other people in my family die. My grandmother, not of alcoholism, not of drug addiction, of other diseases, things like cancer, which is pretty much, let's be honest, in this room we all agree alcoholism is a disease, but as we know, if we went out into the world, even our most liberal, PC, left-leaning friends, to our faces, they may say, it's a disease. I just watched a Dr. Phil. Good for you for overcoming it. But we know in their heads, they're like, woman, pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Stop drinking. They don't like to say, some of them will, but some of them won't. I think you'd have a hard time finding anyone who would tell you that cancer is a moral failing, though. Can we agree on that? Unless you're hanging out with Christian Scientists, it's going to be tough to find someone to say, cancer? You just need to get it together. Like, not going to happen. And when I saw, especially my grandmother die, I compared drug addiction and alcoholism to my grandmother's illness, and I couldn't help but notice that my grandmother's illness didn't seem to be characterized by selfishness, emotional manipulation, and broken promises. And all the alkies in my family, I had no doubt that they loved me, all the drug addicts. I had no doubt. We're crazy, but we love each other, and that's obvious. If you come to my house, they'll say, you're all insane, but we hug a lot. But when I compared alcoholism to all these other illnesses, I got to tell you, my gut started to tell me, and my head started to tell me, these two things don't look alike. You know, my grandmother never got out of a hospital bed with an IV behind her and actively harmed the people that loved her. Her disease wasn't characterized by selfishness, self-centeredness, an obsession with making yourself feel better. My grandmother never did this. She never said she would show up and didn't. And your old man ends up giving us a ride home from practice. Embarrassing. You know what I mean? I appreciate the man's kindness, but all three of us in the car know why your old man's giving us a ride home that night. She never did that. My grandmother never showed up to practice in a state where I wish she stayed home that night. And so something happened to me as a kid. I started to suspect, like, I don't know if it's a disease, because I got to be honest with myself. It doesn't look like other diseases, and it doesn't. We know that. We get that message in the book. We have a spiritual component, and a spiritual component looks like also, I know it's bad news, but check it out, a moral component. We're responsible for doing the right thing or doing the wrong thing. That thought was really uncomfortable for me, and so I made a choice. I made a choice to never think about it again. And I made a choice to never drink or drug, which didn't work out, obviously, or I wouldn't be here. And when I finally did drink, the effect was immediate and magical. And I drank with 8 guys. The first time I really got drunk, more than a sip of booze, I was in a basement in a kind of tough part of Boston. My buddy's older brother bought us booze. He marked it up by 800-900%. I remember what I drank to this day. I drank peppermint schnapps. I know, odd choice for like a 14-year-old. When my dad would relapse secretly, he would take us to Patriots games, and it's cold, and he would take a little flask of schnapps, and we could smell it. You have that smell. And because my dad was the coolest guy that I ever knew, I assumed that peppermint schnapps was the coolest thing on earth to drink. And so when this kid's older brother said, "What do you want?" I went, "Peppermint schnapps." And the older guys laughed at me, and they were like, "Okay, Colonel Clink, does Schultz want something to drink too?" And of course they, $30 or something. And I said, "That sounds like a lot." And they're like, "Dude, it's imported from Germany. They bring it on a boat. You know how much boat gas is?" And I was like, "Yeah, it sounds reasonable." My buddy Bruce got Corona. He got a 12-pack of Corona. They charged him like $40. And when he was like, "That's a lot," they're like, "Dude, they bring that up from Mexico on donkeys. Do you have any idea how much it is to like feed a donkey and care?" And I was like, "That's true, man. They're expensive. That's why you don't see a lot of them." And there was a whole bunch of us. My buddy's basement, his mom was an alcoholic, so she just kind of passed out early. And it was that guy. Remember that guy's house? You could kind of go and party there. And all of us got drunk. All of us got drunk, and I'm sure those guys had a good time. I remember we played cards. I had Zeppelin on the radio. I got up on a table and sang Immigrant Song, right? But a couple of things about that night I'll never forget. The first thing is this. I went upstairs into his house, into the bathroom, and I remember looking at myself in the mirror. Fascinating. And I remember looking at myself in the mirror, first time I'm drunk, and saying, "I want to feel this way the rest of my life. I never want to go back to the other way," meaning not feeling like this. The second thing I'll never forget about that night, was technically that morning, was probably around 3:30 a.m., and all the other guys passed out. It was easy. We're, 13, 14, we named 90 pounds. I came out of a blackout, and I wandered around the basement, and I drank every last drop of booze in that basement. And I remember, it sticks out of my memory because I grabbed my buddy was a wrestler, so he's always trying to lose weight, chewing tobacco, the theory that you're going to spit 50 pounds of saliva eventually, right, to get to weight. And I remember grabbing a bottle of beer and drinking it, and it was dip spit, which is it's awful. And I remember it nauseated me, and then my resolve was high. I just grabbed the next one, and I went, "Well, that one's clean." I'm a guy who probably, realistically, suffered from phenomenon of craving right off the bat. I think that it does, as some of you guys know in this room, for some of you, it takes time for allergy to pop for a lot of people. And I've met a lot of people for whom, I worked with a guy not too long ago. He was almost 60, and he spent most of his life as a take it or leave it guy. He's that guy who'd come to your barbecue, have a half a beer, you know those bastards, and people who aren't really drinkers, they study the bottle. They're, Pilsner. Is a lager different from a Pilsner? So I said, and you make it nuts. You're like, drink it, or I'm going to take it from you. And I remember this guy baffled because he crossed the line after being that kind of moderate drinker for God knows how long. And then he came to us when he was 2 years sober, and he'll never drive again. Obscene amount of DUIs. His adult daughters said they would never talk to him again. He broke a femur falling down the stairs. You know how hard it is to break a human femur? That's like a Flintstones bone. That's huge. It's a brontosaurus bone. It's femur. Broke it. It was yellow. It looked like a zombie horror movie. And what he was clinging to were all those years that he could take it or leave it. And he said, no. We talk about powerlessness. We talk about obsession. And he said, no. You guys don't understand. For most of my life. He said, yeah, for most of your life. And then you crossed this invisible line, and now you're one of us. And he looked at all of us, and he went, no, I'm not one of you, right? Because this was a scene like last night, that little meeting we went to, right? We went to a book workshop last night. These guys picked me up, and there was, 5 weirdos in a room alone. It was one of those scenes. And when he looked, he was, can you imagine? Look at that man right there. Imagine him telling you you're one of me. I want to hear that. And this is one of those guys, it took some time for it to pop in him. I think I'm one of those guys right off the bat. I started and I would lose all control. And I was a relief drinker. I always drank for effect. I worked in a hospital kitchen when I was in high school, which is, if you've ever worked in an institutional kitchen, it's hard work. It's worse than a commercial kitchen. It's hotter. You have to actually climb inside bowls to clean them. You're an Oompa Loompa or something. It's bad work. Man, it's tough, you know? And I remember I would meet up with some of the guys I worked with, and whatever booze people could steal or bad weed, it was high school, we'd do before we went in to do this grueling, horrible labor in a 1,000-degree kitchen. It's tough. And I remember these guys would say, Maddie, do you want a beer? And my question, I wasn't cognizant of this at the time, but I would always say, how many do you have? And if they say, if there's 5 of us and they said we have a 6-pack, there was a time in my life I'd actually decline. And I didn't figure this out till later, but the reason I would decline is when I had 1 beer, it made me insane. 1 beer to me, 1 drink to me, 1 of anything to me is like, when you're out in the summer and your friend gets an ice cream and you don't because you're trying to eat healthier, and then they're just like, oh, it's so, oh my God, and you really wish you got one, and then they finally do this thing, they're like, do you want a lick? No. Then it makes it more real that I don't have one. Yes, remind me of how delicious it is and the fact that I don't have it. And 1 beer for me, I would rather have a punch in the face. Because the times that I would go to work and have 1 or 2, I would drive those guys insane. Because we worked on a line, right, where the trays would come by and you'd put different food on there. And the whole time, I'd say this to them. I go, oh man, I wish we had more beers in the locker room. Wouldn't that be great? I go, yeah. Imagine if we had 12 more beers, huh? Wouldn't that be good? Yeah, Maddie, it would, yeah. Dude, if we had more beer, you know what we could do? We could drink them right now. Yeah, bro, yeah, we don't though. So why don't we just work? And now we don't. It sucks. Imagine if we did though, huh? Wouldn't that be awesome? And I would make those guys insane because it's that itch for me, and it made me nuts. Now, if you showed up and I said, what do you have? And you say, I stole a half a handle of cheap vodka and some creme de menthe from my dad and I have high C. Oh, great. I think that's a real cocktail. They call it a minty C martini. Let's mix it and drink it. Because if I drink, I want relief, and relief for me usually comes with blackout. What happened to me later on, and it put my drinking, but not my alcoholism, on pause, was when I was 17 years old, I got introduced to heroin. And I switched booze to heroin for probably about 5 years. And when I was 22, I worked as a musician. I went to music school. My life fell apart. And my solution, when I finally came to this place where I said, I can't do this anymore, my solution was, I'm going to have to put down the drugs and I'm going to have to just drink like a normal guy. What makes that sentence sad and hilarious, by the way, if you didn't catch it, is the normal guy part. And I conveniently forgot about what my drinking looked like before I got into drugs. And so with the blink of an eye, I find myself back in detox and back in treatments and back in psych units as a result of drinking alcohol. And alcohol beat me up pretty good. And so I finally made a decision to do something about it. I made a decision to start doing coke. And my theory was this, and this is, I couldn't see this at the time, of course, but this is very telling about what's wrong with me. Here was my logic around switching to cocaine. I don't really like cocaine. I don't like things that speed me up. I'm a high-strung guy. I'm racked with anxiety. That's why I like booze, and I like opiates, and I like benzos. I like things that take me down. My theory was, coke is a good drug for me to do because I don't really like coke. Therefore, I won't be tempted to overindulge. This is one of the very few rooms in the world right now that would understand that statement. Most people would be baffled by what I just said. It's baffling to them. Well, I don't get that. Why would you do it? Here's why I do it, because my problem isn't alcohol, as you know, and my problem isn't dope, and my problem isn't coke, and my problem isn't any of the unhealthy behaviors I engaged in the million times I was physically sober. My problem is the thing I was born with, which is a spiritual malady, and what that looks like is I'm not okay. My coke experiment, by the way, it didn't work out well, because it turns out what happens with me with cocaine is I go into this psychosis, and I don't know what it is about the coke, but it always makes them come. And they are coming. And I don't know who they are, but I know they're coming. And no one will listen to reason, and no one will heed the warnings, so I guess it falls on my broad shoulders to take up arms. Can you all see where this is going? This is leading to the psych unit, and that happened to me many, many times. The only way I know how to come down from a drug run like that is to either start drinking or I get locked up. And I got locked up a few times in rapid succession, and I couldn't keep it a secret anymore. I was back near my family in the Boston area, and coming from my family, you're either an alcoholic drug addict or you're in some kind of, I'd like to say recovery, but there's no real drug addicts or alcoholics in my family who've gotten well. But the Al-Anons have, the people who are codependent actually have pretty strong programs in my family. And so they set some boundaries with me pretty quickly. And I started working on getting sober. And I did what my people do. I come from a Catholic AA family. So in my family, if you're being good, if you want a gold star on the forehead, you do two things. On Sunday, you go to Mass. And on weeknights, you go to your meeting. And if you're unemployed, you go to the Noona. Right? The noon meetings are always the fun ones. And I did what my people do, and I started going to lots of meetings, and I started to see a counselor, and I put together some sober time, and I didn't drink and I didn't drug one day at a time. And as a result of not drinking and not drugging one day at a time, my life got progressively worse in every reasonable way, in every way that counts. And when I say that, what I mean is this: a lot of you in this room have figured this out, or you're about to figure it out. I can promise you something purely from the cessation of actively drinking alcohol. I can promise you probably I'll promise you this. If you simply don't drink, by any means necessary, hire 2 bruisers to knock drinks out of your hands, right? Hire a bodyguard. Take antabuse like I did. You know what antabuse is? It's a chemical bodyguard. When I take people through the book, I read that line all the time when Jung is talking to Roland Hazard, right? And he delivers Hazard this brutal news. He says, "I'm sorry, buddy. Guys like you don't get better." And Hazard says, "Doc, what are my options?" And Jung says, "You can chain yourself to a radiator somewhere for the rest of your life, right? which is no life at all. He says, or you can hire bodyguards, which, remember, Hazard, right? Phenomenally wealthy guy. Comes from a politically connected, wealthy family. Hazard's a guy who could have easily hired 2 bruisers to knock cocktails out of his hand. The problem with that solution, if you want to call it that, of course, is this. If you are the man who hired the bruisers, you get to be the man who fires the bruisers when you want to drink bad enough. Antabuse, I ask guys this while we're going through the book. I say, do doctors still sometimes suggest we hire bodyguards? And of course the answer I always get is, no, it's dumb. And I say, oh sure, they suggest we hire bodyguards. I had a doctor say, here's a pill that you take every morning. And it's not a big bruiser to knock a drink out of your hand, but it's a chemical bruiser, and if you drink, it's going to knock that drink out of your stomach, right? You take it, or more accurately, your girlfriend makes you take this pill every morning, and it knocks it right out of there. And so there are ways to simply not drink one day at a time, and as a result of not drinking, you probably won't get DUIs. It's very rare. If you blow a 0-0, they arrest you for DUI, right? You'll probably show up for work more, probably. You'll save money. You won't have to pay those pesky lawyers for those DUIs, for auto repairs, for things like that, right? So I can pretty much promise you physically, your physical health will get better. You won't be internally pickling yourself. And I can promise you financially, your life will probably get better. You show up for work, you'll probably be more productive, right? Most professions, it's better when you're not drunk, right? There are some exceptions. Those things did get better for me as a result of showing up for work, as a result of not getting arrested. And if you see me, I'm a guy, if you bump into me when I have, say, 2 months of sobriety, I actually do look like I'm doing well. And here's what I mean by that. I don't have leaves and debris in my hair as a result of sleeping outside. That really happened, by the way. I was sleeping outside, and I bumped into a girl that I'd went on a date with about 6 months prior to this. I was in the middle of a bad run, and I saw her coming. And she went out with one date and realized how bad I was and never wanted to talk to me again. And so I had to impress her. And so I put on all these airs. I was a homeless guy at the time, and she looked terrified. And how are you doing? Good, how are you? I was like, good. I got a meeting. I'm in advertising now. A big, one of these big buildings, I forget. And I thought I pulled it off, and she walked away. I was on Mass Ave in Boston. I looked in the glass of the storefront, and my hair is pretty short now compared to how it was. I look like Gene Simmons, right? I got this Mediterranean hair. It turns into a giant wild afro. I had sticks and twigs in my hair, so I probably didn't pull off the advertising thing, as I never worked in advertising, but from what I've heard in that world, it's usually suit and tie. It's not usually birds laying eggs in your afro. But when I'm not drinking and drugging, and I'm going to meetings, if you see me at 2 months, I have a nice shirt on, and I'm freshly shaven, and I go back to the gym, so I'm looking pretty good. I put on some muscle, right? So long as we don't talk for more than 10 minutes. If we talk for more than 10 minutes, you're going to know I'm kind of squirrely. But if we talk for just 10 minutes, I can bullshit you, and you think I'm doing well. And in fact, when you go home that night, you go, I bumped into that Matt Howe. He looks terrific. This is what you say. I assume you say this because I look terrific, right? Look, he's going back to those meetings. And then whoever it is you're talking to about me, because people like to talk about me, says, good for him. I'm glad he's going back to those meetings. I look like I'm doing pretty good. I have money in my pocket and I'm wearing a new shirt. The problem is this, what you don't know is this. I'm walking home, and I'm possibly walking home from my second meeting of the day, and I'm fantasizing about suicide. And I have money in my pocket. I'm just looking for a particular store. I can't find it. It's the store that sells products that deliver that same mysterious, elegant, potent kind of ease and comfort that I get at once with a drink. Can't find it. And so, yeah, I have money, but what am I going to do with it? And maybe my blood pressure's down because I'm back on the treadmill. But I don't know that I care about, like, my cholesterol when I'm fantasizing about suicide. I don't know that I care anymore. So all the important things, the things that happen in here, they're getting worse. And when I finally drink about 3 days later, you're surprised. You go, oh, what happened? It's baffling to you. It looks like such a tragedy. You know all these celebrities who they relapse or they overdose, right? And the whole world goes, oh, that guy had 20 years sober. It came out of the blue, or she was doing so light. No, we know it. No. I have a lot of compassion for these guys that you hear about in the newspapers who die, and you go, wow, that was probably a long time coming. That sickness was a long time coming. And when I pick up 3 days later, the people who don't really know me, they're surprised. I'm not surprised. The only surprise for me is that I made it that long. There was a seminal moment in my life in my early 20s. I came back to Boston. I got strings pulled for me. I got a really good job working for a music software company. You ever seen that movie Office Space? It was one of those jobs where they paid me way too much money to do a job where I really didn't work very hard. In fact, I still to this day, I'm unclear about what my duties were. And I was just waiting for them to hire a consultant to be like, who is this guy and what does he do and why do you give him this money? And the trick to that kind of job, by the way, when people would walk by my office, I'm not doing anything, but I would act like I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. So people would come by and be like, how are you? I'd go, and they go, leave that guy alone. He's always under the gun. People go, what does he do? I don't know. I don't even want to know. And it's kind of a dream job, and they pay me a lot of money, and I get all these perks. You know, people give me free stuff all the time, and it's a cool guy job. I have this cool creative job. It was one of those offices with pinball machines and catering, you know. And I'm coming up on a few months sober, and I talked to my uncle, another guy who died of an overdose. And my uncle said, hey, what do you have, 4 months or something? I said, yeah. And he said, how you feeling? I went, that's my best day not drinking. It's my best day. Here, let me describe it to you. Ready? That's not good. My best day, not drinking 1 day at a time, is this. I haven't had active thoughts of suicide today. I've thought about killing other people, but I haven't thought about killing myself. My best day not drinking is characterized by emptiness and a sense of detachment, and I'm not passionate about anything. I don't feel things. I'm convinced I'm a robot some days. You know what I mean? I can't get excited about anything. Nothing brings me any joy. That's my best day. I put it on my tombstone. Here lies Matt Age. And my uncle looked at me and he said, let me ask you a question. I said, what? He said, what are you doing for you? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, listen, you got sober to enjoy life, correct? And I went, I guess. I thought it had something to do with court. I'll go with the enjoy life thing, sure. And my uncle said, then what you need to do is you need to go take care of yourself for a day. And this is a philosophy that a lot of you have tried. Probably worked as poorly for you as it did for me. For a long time, what I was convinced was this. I needed to substitute something else for alcohol. You know what I mean? You've probably done it. Stop drinking and buy a motorcycle. Anyone try that one? That'll fix you. Stop drinking and go back to school. Stop drinking and get a divorce. Stop drinking and learn origami, man. Stop drinking and build a barn. Stop drinking and move to California. Stop drinking, right? I'm going to take the booze out and I'm going to substitute it with something else. And so what I did was I went and I tried to figure out what it is that I like to do. And here was the problem at that point in my life. I forgot what I like to do. That's one of my problems when you take booze away from me. I suffer from this kind of emptiness where I stop caring about things. I don't care about anything anymore. It's an awful way to feel, isn't it? I'll take anger over that feeling any day of the week. I'd rather be angry than empty because at least when I'm angry, I know I'm a human being, right? Only relief I used to get, I'd go to the gym for 2 hours a day and listen to really angry hardcore music and slap myself in the face. And I'd scream in a mirror and lift weights until the woman who worked at the gym would be like, you're scaring people, please. Sober. I'll take anger over emptiness, and emptiness is what I experience when I'm not drinking. I just don't care. I'm just detached. I feel irritability, but that's about it. And I remember I went to the mall. I was really depressed, so I went to the fancy mall. I went to the really rich mall in Boston, a place called Copley Plaza. And I remember going into every store in that mall. I went into the Banana Republic. I own 100 black shirts. I'm one of those guys. I only dress in black, right? And I go in the bookstore, and I've read everything. And I went into the Sharper Image. You ever seen that store? I'm just confused in there. I don't understand what those things do. like a $700 golf executive desk clacker foot massage thing. I don't know what I need. And I'll never forget, this is a seminal moment in my life. I wasn't in a place to process it yet or contextualize it. I went to the next mall, the Prudential Center, which is a real touristy place, and I sit in the corner, I'm eating bad Chinese food, and I'm all jaded, and I remember thinking to myself, I went, this mall sucks. And then it hit me. It's not the mall. It's me. I'm ruined. I'm broken. I know by this point in my life, whatever, I can go buy a new motorcycle, I could go buy whatever it is. The problem is nothing's fixing me. And I keep making up stories to myself to try and explain my misery. You know what I mean by that? Let me give you an example. I'm in a relationship, and I'm so confused about the fact that I'm miserable that I'm baffled by it. It's like have you guys ever had a sickness and you don't know what it is for a while? You gotta go to the doctor. It's the worst thing in the world. A few years ago, I thought I had Lyme disease, and I had a nurse practitioner, which I love. Nurse practitioners better than doctors, right? They earned it. Love a nurse practitioner. I'm tired. I'm lethargic. We're running through all this stuff, and she says, well, I said, what? Tell me. And she goes, I don't know what's wrong with you. I wish she made something up. Honestly, I wish she said plague. 14th century, you're done. Because I did the worst possible thing. I went home and I went on WebMD. You ever use that? I use WebMD and I'm insane calling her and I'm like, it's ovarian cysts. I know it is. And I got it. And she's like, yeah, that's not, do I need to explain this to you why it's not? And I'm coming up with all this crazy stuff. Honest to God, I wish she would have just told me it was cancer because it was months before we figured out what it was. And that period of time is awful, isn't it? If you guys have ever had a biopsy or something, you know it's just terrible to wait. And I can't figure out why I'm not okay. And so I try to come up with all these explanations. I'm in a relationship, and what I tell myself is this. She doesn't understand me. She doesn't get me. I need a creative woman. You know what I mean? I need an artist or a ballet dancer or a woman who builds ice sculptures, right? Because she was a businesswoman. And once I'm dating like Bjork, I guess I'm looking for, right? Then I'll be okay. I need a woman who shares my passion. And so I do this thing where I know that's my problem, this woman. And so I do this very alcoholic thing. Instead of breaking up with her, I just treat her poorly in the hopes that she'll do the deed, which eventually she does. And then here's what happens. I meet some other woman who is creative and is an artist, and I realize, oh, she's completely, totally flaky and fruity. And there can't be two of that kind of person in a relationship because bills don't get paid, the house never gets cleaned. You know what I mean? And so I try to explain it to myself by saying, I need to get out of Boston. I'm a townie. I got to get out. It's this town. I can't be here. Look at all, it's a townie town. I know what the problem is. I got to get to California, land of sunshine. And then I get to California, and I'm still there, and so I got to explain it to myself, right? And I keep putting these carrots on the ends of sticks, saying, I'm crazy and I'm miserable, but I think I know what it is now. And it doesn't matter, you can plug in any carrot you want, right? Once I finish school, once the mortgage is paid off, once she's gone, once he's back, right? And I'm trying to explain this to myself, and I just can't. Pete Rollins, a theologian from Northern Ireland, he's got this little parable that's brilliant. He talks about these three brothers, and their dad dies, and they each get an inheritance, little inheritance, and they all have the same goal. Their goal is to grow that money into $10 million, right? And the first guy works at it, but along the way he meets a woman and he falls in love. And they have kids, and they build a house, and he has a life, and unfortunately has to put his dream on the back burner. Anyone have to do that in here? In his best moments, like at his kid's birthday party, or when he's teaching his little girl to ride a bike or something, he almost completely forgets about the dream. And he does get something out of this. What's he get? Well, he gets really rich family relationships, right? He gets to have children. He gets a woman he loves. He gets a family life. So he does get something out about it. But in those quiet moments, like at night when his kids are asleep and his wife's asleep, he kind of sits there, and in those moments, the pain comes out because he knows he kind of gave up on his dream. You get it? A lot of you in this room, you probably had to sacrifice things for a family, right? Or for duty, right? Yeah, I got this great job in Hawaii, but my mom was sick, and I needed to stay here, and God knows, man, who knows what happened if I went to Hawaii? I could be the king of Hawaii. And you have satisfaction knowing you stayed in Nebraska to take care of your mom because that's the kind of person you are. But in those quiet moments, you go, I wonder what would have happened if I took that job, right? And that's what that guy has to live with. The second brother, he refuses to give up on the dream. Refuses. He just clings to it. He's got this passion. And he won't give it up. As a result, he never makes the money. And as a result, his health fails. He's under stress all the time. He has to forsake having really rich relationships with other human beings because he doesn't have time for a wife, he doesn't have kids, right? What he does get is he gets that certain kind of satisfaction that comes from pursuing a dream and never letting it go. But the price of that is, again, no family, a lack of love in his life, and his health falls apart. Now the third brother, check this out, this guy's successful. He invests that money really, really wisely. And he actually makes $10 million. The dream happens for him, right? He enjoys it at first. He buys some nice cars. He goes on some nice vacations. Builds in the house he always wanted, right? But after the novelty of all that stuff wears off, because you all know, you get a new car. I like cars, right? Remember that car that you were so happy about? A year later, it's just your car. You know that. After the novelty of his stuff wears off, he's actually in worse shape than the other two brothers because he hit the mark. And he got it. And he had to reckon with this. Still not okay. There's still some emptiness there. There's still some lack of fulfillment. There's still something I'm missing, right? And he has to explain that to himself. So here's what he comes up with. He says, I know what I need. I need $100 million. Once I get $100 million, then I'll be okay. You see the common denominator with all these guys? Don't miss the point. The point isn't that stuff won't make you happy. The point is they're all trying to explain this sense of emptiness to themselves. And they're all looking in the wrong direction, aren't they? I did that for a very, very long time. I kept trying to explain to myself what was wrong with me. And I kept trying to find some satisfaction, and there was none to be had. I took it a step further, like some of you in this room. I tried to use God, and I tried to use steps to do the same thing. And that's not how this stuff is designed to work. And that's a lot of people I work with. They ask me for help, they ask me for sponsorship, they ask me for something, and I talk about that's what I do. I don't know any other way that works. People tell me there are, and that's terrific. I've never encountered them. And I say, well, I take people through the big book, and I'll show you how to take steps. And they go, I already did the steps. They didn't work for me. I'm bulletproof. I'm a bulletproof alcoholic. What do you got for me, right? And I look at them and I say, I highly doubt you were in the steps since you're asking me for help and you're still drinking. And you know what that's like, right? That's a sick, grateful alcoholic. You poke them with a verbal stick like that, they're just about to explode, right? Don't you tell me I wasn't in the steps. You were never in the steps. You probably did what I did. Here's what I did, by the way. Purely by mistake, someone takes me through the big book. And when I say by mistake, I mean I got taken through the book pretending to be interested. I was interested, but I wasn't interested in the steps. You want to know what I was interested in? A place to live. I had no place to live. I was on the street again. It was uncomfortable. I was living in a shelter. I'm showering with 19 other men at a time. You ever do that? I like my comfort. That was awesome. She was like, I've never done that. I kind of meant to the dudes in the room, but that was awesome. She was like, no, of course I haven't done that. I mean, other guys, if you were in the service or if you were, say, in jail or something, right? It's when you don't have privacy, it's a basic, that was classic, though. I'm in a place where I have no privacy, and there's a scabies outbreak. That made my night. And I had a chance to go somewhere else that was more comfortable. And when I was presented with an opportunity to go through the big book, I went along with it, but I already thought I was an expert on the big book. Here's why. I went to big book meetings. And the big book meetings that I went to, here's how they operated. We would open to a story in the back of the book. And they would say, we're going to pass this around and read a paragraph, and then you pass and read a paragraph. And that's what I thought the big book was. I thought it was just the stories in the back. And you guys ever been to a meeting where you read a paragraph and then pass it? That make you want to kill yourself? That is torture. I would rather just pick one person. Let me have some continuity of narration. Because you read and you can't pronounce the big words, and it's etiquette. Do I help her? Is that me coming off as arrogance? If I'm like, it's obsession. And so what I thought that the big book was all about is, here's what I thought the big book was. A really bad speaker meeting. It's a speaker meeting where the speaker's dead, and we recorded what she said, and now we're going to read it slowly and painfully for an hour. I had no idea that the beginning of that book is the important part. I remember seeing one of these guys who had, the little mini book that's just got the instructions, and I was like, look at your cute little big book. What do you got there? Yeah. And he's like, here's the important stuff. I'm like, keep telling yourself that. Little big book. And it was. We started with the title page that says the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. A word which at the time I found to be offensive. Because I grew up in a culture where you don't use the term recovered. You say recovery. This was drilled into my head like the Hail Mary, right? You're always in recovery, you're never recovered. And in fact, the neighborhood I grew up in, still to this day, if you go to some of these meetings, because I've been back to them, and you drop language like recovered, or God forbid you talk about the big book, they will jump you in the parking lot. Man, you'll get out after the meeting, and out of the dark, you'll be like, what is that? These dudes will come out. What's up, recovered boy? Got your big book with you, kid? Talking about not suffering from crippling depression and fighting thoughts of joy. Yeah, come here. Those guys it'll be a bad scene in there. And so my reaction when they pointed out that word recovered, I went, you never recovered, you're always recovered. Because I was programmed to say it, And the guys working with me, especially the guy who took me through the big book, big, tall, bald guy, he had a deep voice, he goes, I'm recovered. I went, never recovered, I was recovered. And he went, we're recovered. And I'd like to tell you that fast interested me, oh, there's hope. But you know what it really did? It pissed me off. Because I knew they were lying. And here's why. I tried to figure this out, and I didn't. I failed. And no offense, but I'm like 1,000,000 times smarter than you. Which means if I didn't figure it out, there's no way you figured it out. Do you get it? That's self-will, right? You have nothing to offer me because if it was good, I would have come up with it on my own. No, I don't need to listen to what you say. I would have come up with it on my own. Do it all the time, right? Do it with my sponsor. I get some feedback on inventory, and I go, no, I would have already thought of that if it was real or what you were saying, how it was valid. And it is. And so the reason that I went through the book with these guys was almost to prove them wrong. I'm not resentful, by the way. Not too much later, I was given instructions for a fourth step, first column, and guess what I answered? They said, write down a list of your resentment, people, places, institutions, businesses. And I went, I'm a pretty mellow guy. Just kind of let shit roll off my back. Let's put this in context. Keep in mind why I'm taking steps. I'm taking steps out of spite. I'm doing spiritual work out of spite and resentment, and my answer to them is, I'm not resentful. Really high opinion of myself, right? I thought very, very highly of myself. I went through the doctor's opinion. I went through Bill's story. I went through There Is a Solution. I went through more about alcoholism. We went through the beginning of the book, and I had this experience. For the first time in my life, something made sense to me about what was wrong. And I actually did get relief from that. The idea that I suffer from something akin to a physical allergy, where when I put anything into my body, this compulsion to do more arises that no amount of will, no amount of mental force can shut down, right? That made perfect sense to me. Because how many times in my life, right hand to God, all I wanted was one glass of wine, and what happens? Your brother-in-law escorts me out of the wedding, right? I swear to you that's not what I wanted. My brother's girlfriend actually lost her car once. When I say lost, I don't mean the police towed it and pounded it. I physically lost it. Multiple days later, I woke up with my brother on top of me, smacking me back into consciousness, screaming, going, "Where is Karen's car?" That was not my intention, right? Many times in my life, I've had to show up and give a clean urine. Well, if I stop on Monday, my urine will be clean by the 14th. I just couldn't stop. And it was explained to me that that's not my big problem. My big problem is what happens when I'm not drinking, right? My big problem is when I'm not using. I suffer from this thing called obsession, and it's a real bitch because obsession tells me that I'm not suffering from obsession. You see how nasty that is? For a long time, I thought obsession was like thinking about drinking or drugging. It's interesting, if you go through the big book, and this may be up for interpretation, but it's my interpretation, especially if you look at Jim's story and Fred's story. In the big book, he doesn't really classify repetitive thoughts of a drink or a drug as obsession, does he? He says it comes in two primary flavors. One, we don't think at all. Two, we convince ourselves that things which are completely not based in reality and utterly fallacious are true. This time it'll be different. I have a mountain of evidence that says no, it'll be exactly like it was every other time, but I believe it. And that's what's so nasty about obsession, isn't it? It tells you don't suffer from obsession anymore. It tells you, right? Restless, irritable, discontented. This all made so much sense to me, I almost wept. And I took a third step, and I wrote a fourth step. This is recorded, so people won't be able to see those air quotes. Do you guys understand why I put third step and fourth step in air quotes? I wasn't in the steps. I did an intellectual third step, I suppose, and an intellectual first step, right? But I never had the real experience of that concession. I was real impressed with my newfound self-knowledge. And I owned pay attention, I owned a notebook with resentments in it. And I owned a big book. This is impressive too, check it out. Underlined in multiple colors of highlighters. That's how you know a serious student of the big book. In fact, I'm such a self-seeker, I went out of my way to make sure that my big book was overflowing with notes. And I had subtext and subnotes, and I put in I just refer to it, and I'd open it like, oh, this one's falling apart, because I know it so well. Just because you own a big book doesn't mean you're in the steps. Pay attention to that. Just because you're in a meeting doesn't mean you're in recovery. I see people all the time writing a fourth step, or so they think. They haven't taken a first step yet. I talked to someone I was working with a few weeks ago, and I walked by her, and she had her little notebook, and I said, hey, when are you going to get in the steps? Ooh, and that pissed her off, and she looked at me, and she went, in the fourth step. I said, you're not in the fourth step. You haven't taken a first step. I didn't. All I did with the big book and all I did with the steps is what I tried to do with everything else. I tried to use it. And I confused spirituality with the force. I confused spirituality with sorcery. There's a difference. Sorcery is this. You try to harness some power to get the things you want. You guys know what I mean by that? And this is what I thought the steps were going to do for me. The steps were going to give me the life I wanted. They were going to make me money. I was going to go back to working in music, right? I was going to have this one. People were going to think I was going to get all these things. That's sorcery, man. That's the Jedi Force. You control that. That's a force you control, which means you're playing God. I was playing God. And I thought I was in the steps, and I didn't drink for about 9 months until this weird thing happened. I was working at a bar, a divey rock bar, I'm behind a bar every night. We got bands. I was really impressed with myself. For you guys who know Fred's story, remember that line? The first time I went through the big book, this meant nothing to me. I came back later on and really took steps, and these lines lit up like they were on fire. Fred had no trouble turning down drinks. You remember this? And he said, and I think I was just making too big of a deal out of this. And I was behind a bar every night. And for you guys who ever worked in restaurants, if you work behind a bar, there's no way to not get booze on you. It's on your clothes. It's everywhere. If you put the wrong kind of tap into a keg, like a European tap into an American, you ever do that? Beer sprays out like a fire hose. It's all over you. And I'm working in a bar, and I'm so impressed with myself that it's easy for me to not drink. And I know who has drugs in the bar, and it's easy for me to pass on the drugs. Easy. If you guys ever worked in a bar, you know. You come into my bar and sit down with pupils like dinner plates, going, grinding your jaw. Like, we want shots, we got shots. I know you had Coke. You come into my bar and order Pepsi with like grenadine in it. You don't want booze and you're falling asleep, right? I know you got dope. And I was so impressed with myself that I didn't even have the desire to drink or use. I thought I was like, remember that show Cheers? Remember Sam? He just didn't drink. And people would say this to me. They'd say, hey, you really don't drink? And I'd go, no. And they'd go, you work at a bar every night? And I'd go, yeah. And they'd go, wow, man, that's really impressive. That's really inspirational. And I'd go, I guess it is in some ways, yeah. And I was real impressed with myself. Now, pay attention. I couldn't see this at the time. If you actually look at my life, I'm profoundly sick around a woman. I'm profoundly sick around exercise, right? I'm profoundly sick around the food I put in my body. I'm profoundly sick around money. Anyone see the magic trick I did, by the way? I never got well. Yeah, I substituted out the substances, but my life was pretty sick. If you gave me a lie detector for those 9 months, if you asked me if I was in the steps, I would have answered yes, and I would have passed, because I really thought I was. And what happened to me after 9 months is I never thought about drinking. I had this cute little trick that I'd play, and I put a picture of the homeless shelter that I'd lived in before this period of my life up on my nice refrigerator, because I got my money back, and I got my cool guy status back, right? I'm not playing music, but I'm behind a bar. It's a cool guy job. And every morning I'd wake up and look at that homeless shelter. And Mickey talked about this. I'm going to try to use my memory and my self-knowledge, right? And every morning I'd look at that homeless shelter and I'd say, go ahead, asshole. Pick up a drink today. You'll be back there right quick, right? No effective mental defense at certain times. You could make the argument that that picture of the homeless shelter was a perfectly effective mental defense and that I never thought about drinking. And it worked 100%. It was 100% successful until the day that it was 0% successful. And I never thought about drinking. I noticed one night, I'm behind the bar that I run, and I had this big blowout with the girl that I was obsessed with that I made into my higher power. And I noticed that I'm guzzling Jim Beam. Here's what's interesting about that. I'm a vodka drinker. I don't care for Jim Beam. And I'm running this bar, which means it's essentially my bar that night. If I planned a relapse, you know what I would have done? I would have turned around, I would have grabbed some Grey Goose or some Kettle One. I would have put it in a shaker tin with ice, poured some olive juice in there, shaking the shit out of it. 3 olives. I would have put it in a frosted martini glass, because I'm classy, and if I'm going to relapse, it's going to be a classy relapse. And I would have toasted, right? Instead, I notice I'm drinking something I don't even care for. That tells you something about that relapse, if you want to even call it a relapse, because I never got well. I didn't think. I grabbed whatever was in front of me, and in this case, it was booze that I didn't even like, and I snapped off the speed pour and I guzzled it. Again, how do you defend against that? How do you think through the drink? How do you think through a state of mind characterized by the absence of all reasonable thought? What I heard in meetings for years, by the way. Call your sponsor before you drink. What about those moments where I don't think? What about those moments where I'm returned to sanity via the drink? Mickey talked about this as well. That's the bummer of speaking after a guy where you agree with him with everything he says. You're like, yeah, he said that. Yeah, he's right. Yep. I had some knowledge of who I was, and I knew there was a way to get better, and I wasn't using it, and that's like hell on earth. And I lived in a nightmare for about the next year. And I drank in misery. And let me tell you something, spare yourself this experience. And anyone in the room who's had this experience will agree with me. Do a little bit of step work, right? Do a little bit of step work. Start a little bit of a relationship with God. Here's what's really dangerous. Check this out. Take a third step. Make a deal with God. Dangerous. And then break it. Go back out and drink, and you will hurt in a place that you didn't even know you owned. I promise you that. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. Because I'll tell you what's pretty evil is this. I'll never forget sitting at a bar, drinking Maker's Mark, experiencing the phenomenon of craving, and guess what was in my head? I'm experiencing the phenomenon of craving. It's a physical compulsion to drink more that no amount of mental control can overcome. And I cried at that bar, because that's all I could think about for the year. Here's what I could think about: obsession, rid, selfishness, allergy. And I didn't get sober because I wanted to stop drinking. That's not why I took steps. I didn't take steps because I wanted to stop drinking. I was working in Cabo San Lucas. I was a bartender, a bad one. And I was waiting for death to come, and death was taking its time, and I made my way up to a little place called La Paz. And when I got to La Paz, I made a decision to finally just do it, to finally just hole up, right, my deserted barn, and drink myself to death. And what happened was really horrifying. I kept drinking and drinking and drinking, and I kept waking up. And this baffled me, because I'm a guy who spent a lot of time in psych units, and I'm a guy who spent a lot of time in hospitals, and that was accidental. And now I'm actively trying to kill myself with booze, and it's just not happening. I just keep running out of booze. I keep waking up going, remember that movie Groundhog Day? And I'm not walking into traffic, and there's still things I can't explain to myself about why I didn't jump off a bridge, you know? Because my world was purposeless. My world was meaningless. I wasn't attached to human existence anymore. I didn't feel anything. There's this great scene. I just started watching the show Game of Thrones. You guys seen that show? I put off getting into it because everyone liked it. And if everyone likes something, I assume that it's stupid because I'm cool, and I refuse to do it. Like, if I had never eaten ice cream, I wouldn't eat it because you all like it. And I'd be like, I'm stuck then. So I started watching that show. I got into that show, and there's this one great scene that I just saw where this big guy, they call him the Hound, he's this big bruiser. He's with this little girl, and they come upon this old man who's dying. He's got a wound. And this big soldier, the Hound, he looks at this wound on this guy, and he says, that's the end, you know? And he says, yeah. And the little girl says, why don't you just do yourself in and get it over with? And he looks up, and he has this great answer. She says, why bother going on? And he goes, habit. That represents my life near the end. Why bother staying alive, Matt? Habit. I don't believe in bottoms. I think it's an absurd concept. I hate to break the news to you. You can disagree with me if you like, but I read the news every morning, CNN and BBC, and I have yet to come across a story that says, you know, danger, the universe is running out of bad shit to happen to you. I think that concept of this bottom thing where you magically all of a sudden get well, it's a way for you to put off doing some real work. But I did experience powerlessness, and that I wanted to be dead, and I couldn't even pull that off. Not a bottom, but my first experience with genuine powerlessness. Because up until that point in time, even all that time I thought I was in the steps, I was still self-will run riot. I finally made it back to California, and I was sick and I was in bad shape, and I finally did a real third step, and I turned my life and my will over to a God that I did not believe in. And again, as Mickey said, faith is not belief. Belief happens to you. You don't pick your beliefs. It's upsetting, I know, but you don't. No one in this room chose to believe this book was blue, did you? Nor could you choose to believe this book was green. If you could choose your beliefs, it would be great. You'd never have to return ugly Christmas presents. It'd be easy to get in shape. If I served you delicious fettuccine alfredo, you could say, I choose to believe I don't like fettuccine alfredo. I choose to believe that steamed broccoli is my favorite dish, right? Pay attention to this. You don't really choose your belief in God either. It happens to you. And whether you believe in God or not, doesn't seem to make much difference around your drinking, does it? I've gotten to take professional God people through the steps. One of my favorite guys I ever took through the work was an 82-year-old Anglican priest. Vicious intellect, had like 11 advanced degrees. Sharp is smarter than me, right? At my peak. That sounded arrogant, but whatever. You know what I mean? This man believed in God. He was required to get health insurance, right? One of the most humble men I've ever met. We're taking him through the book, and here's a guy who knows more than me about theology. He knows more than me, but I remember sitting with this guy, and we're about to do agnostics, which is I'm taking a priest through agnostics. That's like talking to a doctor about his health problems, you know what I mean? And I remember he looked up and he said, listen, I know a lot about theology. He said, but I'm clearly missing something because I can't stop drinking and you can. He said, so show me what I'm missing. Tremendously impressive man. Believe in God, you don't believe in God, doesn't make much difference. In my experience, the guys who come in, the people who come in calling themselves atheists, a lot of times they have an easier time doing this because they haven't convinced themselves that they already have God in their life. One of the most misunderstood lines in the big book is when Evie says to Bill, choose your own conception of God. You're all allowed to choose your own conception of God. We're all allowed to choose our conception of God because we're just going to be wrong in the end anyway. Start with any conception you want because you're just going to be wrong. Your conception of God up until the point where you really experience God the way you need to is roughly akin to your opinion of a restaurant you have yet to eat at or an album you've never heard. If I say, hey, have you ever eaten at Villa Francesca restaurant in the north end of Boston, what would you say? No. Okay, tell me, should I take my mom there? I don't know. I've never eaten there. Tell me. My sister ate there. She said it was pretty good. I see lines around the block. I've looked inside. It looks nice, but you have no valid conception of what the dining experience at that particular restaurant is like until you do what? You go, you eat there. Afterwards, you have your espresso, you come out, and then you interpret your experience. And whatever conception arises as a result of your experience, that's your conception. Don't get attached to it, by the way, because the next time you eat there, what's going to happen to your conception? I don't get attached to my conception of God. My conception of God are thoughts I have about God. I'm a human being, an alcoholic at that. I have very human thoughts. Any thoughts I have about God are my crazy human thoughts. I don't get attached to them, and I certainly don't worship them. Your conception of God will always tell you more about yourself than they ever tell you about God. I'm in a process of continually trying to make room and get rid of any thoughts I have about God so that I can make some room for actual God to come in, right? I take a third step. I don't believe in God because I have no reason to believe in God. But this is an act of faith for me. Faith has a lot more to do with gambling than belief. Belief has a lot to do with empirical data, right? You don't pick your beliefs, they happen to you. Faith is a lot scarier than belief because you have to gamble. So what I did when I took a third step, I had to put my chips down and I had to say, I'm going to throw myself into this work and I'm going to do it. And I don't know what's going to happen. I'm taking a risk. I hope something happens. I hope I get well, even though I don't know what that means. I'm taking that gamble. That's a lot scarier than belief, isn't it? I don't know if it's possible for me to get better. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if I'll find this thing the book calls God. But I'm willing to jump off of that cliff. I'm going to bring something to the altar of the steps and make a sacrifice. And that was the most important thing I ever did. I had no way of knowing that at the time. And it didn't look very glamorous. It was a sad, smelly, homeless man in a Greyhound bus parking lot of San Diego, California, mumbling the third step prayer to himself, right? You think about the absurdity of this. You have a guy who calls himself an atheist at the time on his knees in a parking lot with horrible, long Gene Simmons hair, begging, making a commitment, right? And spiritually and possibly all-encompassing, for the first time in my life, I made a commitment to make something holy. I made a commitment to adhere to these principles and do this, not knowing what was going to happen. That's gambling, that's risk, that's faith, right? That word faith that we use in the English language, it comes from this word pistis in the New Testament in Greek. And pistis doesn't mean scientific data. Pistis means to be loyal to something, to put your heart into it, right? To commit to it. 4th century, a guy named Jerome translates that into Latin, and he uses 2 words. He uses credo, which means to put your heart in, and fidel, faithfulness, loyalty, see it through to the end. And when we're talking about faith, that's what we mean. We take a gamble. We take a risk. Still to this day, I'm a big believer in 10-step inventory. Some of you guys call it additional 4th step. I write my inventory because I need to, because my head is a bad place. It lies to me. I read my inventory to my sponsor. I get some guidance on what I have to do. I have to have this conversation with you. I don't want to. It's difficult. I'd rather put it off. Here's my act of faith. Here's my act of gambling. Here's my commitment to the steps. I don't know how this is going to shake out, because that's what we consider to be God's will, right? But what I'm trusting in, what I'm gambling on is, if I do the right thing here, if I continue to hold these principles up as holy and sacred, that whatever happens on the back end will be what's supposed to happen. And that I'll be okay, even though I don't know what okay is going to look like. It may not be comfortable. You see, my idea of okay is very different than before. My life was about comfort and pleasure before. That's why I tried to seek God the way I sought vodka. I thought that I was looking for a Jesus Xanax. That's the best way to put it. I thought I was going to find God, and God was going to give me pleasure and comfort. It's not like that. Being okay is different than what I thought being okay was. Completely different. And again, the difference between spirituality and sorcery, I do this work not to change the world, because the world's going to keep going. I take steps because it changes me internally. It's an internal alchemy. And I may change internally, and here's what the change might look like. Check this out. I'm really uncomfortable. I'm in this bad position. I work for you. It's rough. It's all this. I do all this work internally, and it may not look like this. I may not get this divine relief from, say, inventory and work with a sponsor. I may not come to work the next day happy. Work may still suck. You know what? My perspective may change, and I might say, yeah, I get it now. This is what I'm supposed to go through right now. I'm meant to sit in some discomfort from right now. Most of you in this room have probably figured this truth out, right? Growth never happens without pain. It just doesn't. Change in any system takes stress on the system, mechanical system, chemical system, spiritual system. I'll close with this. I think we're about hitting that time. I have a sign, a little plaque on my wall that I hang. It's right next to my desk at work. I stole it from a Buddhist nun named Pema Chodron. Everything axiomatic is stolen, you know that, right? Every time I think I come up with some brilliant spiritual axiom, I read some obscure book, and I'm like, what's this, 1840? He already wrote that. This sign that I stole from this Buddhist nun, it says, the only way to find that which is indestructible in you is to expose yourself over and over again to annihilation. And my translation of that, if you even need one, which you probably don't, is this: if you want to be real, if you want to be authentic, if you want to get down to that core, right, that true self, that false self, that ego, that bullshit self, you got to expose it to the flames over and over again, and that's scary, isn't it? And it's gonna hurt. And I got to offer those things to God. I got to offer my desire to impress you and make sure that you think I'm good and I was worth an expensive plane ticket, right? And my comfort. I don't want to tell you the problems. I don't want you to. I gotta offer that up, and I expose that to annihilation, and that's got to be painful. But you know what it's going to do is, in the end, it's going to leave what's supposed to be there, what God wants there, and whatever that is, that's going to be the real me. The rest of me, the stuff that Matt puts on top, it's all a fabrication, right? I'm very, very happy to be here. I'm happy to be here with you guys. I was honored. You guys taking me to that meeting last night. I can't tell you how much that meant to me. 5, technically 6 weirdos in a room reading the big book to each other. I need that. I need connections with people. That's my connection with God. So thank you for having me out here. I really look forward to doing some workshop stuff tomorrow, talking about the steps together, getting to hear Mickey and some of these guys. I need that too. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for inviting me out here, and I'm really looking forward to being around.